They have made the transition to what some call death, but what others call to the realm of the ancestors or the egungun. Then a period can be placed behind the testament of that life. And then we can carefully and critically make an analysis of that life. Dr. King laid down his life for us, and Dr. King believed in the moral conscience of the white man. And since we're talking about civil rights and human rights here tonight, I think it's fitting that we begin right there. He believed in the moral conscience of the white man. Well, I'm here tonight at D&J to tell you that the white man ain't got no morals and he ain't got no conscience. Dr. King believed in civil rights. Well, I'm here to tell you that the white man ain't too civil and he ain't too right. Malcolm believed in human rights. I'm here to tell you that the white man ain't too human and he ain't too right. It makes no difference whether it's civil rights or human rights. You must weigh the circumstances surrounding the very origin of the white man into the world to then determine if he's capable of being civil, if he's capable of being human. This we must put on the scale of Ma'at and give it the meiotic weigh-in and see if it strikes the meiotic balance. And if it does not strike the meiotic balance, then we must make sure that we are not victims of history, because it is written that he or she who does not learn the lessons of history is doomed to repeat them. 30 years ago, the prestigious, pristine presidential White House Commission set up by Lyndon Baines Johnson, a redneck camel breath hunky from Texas, an outlaw from Texas, a gun-slinging outlaw from Texas. Lyndon Baines Johnson set up the Kerner Commission, and the Kerner Commission determined that America 30 years ago was two Americas, one black and one white, separate and unequal, and that the number one problem in America 30 years ago was white racism. 30 years later, after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Kerner Commission has reconvened and determined that America is still two Americas, one black and one white, separate still, unequal still, and that the number one problem in America today is still white racism. 30 years after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they questioned Jet Magazine staff, and journalists questioned the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They questioned Sister Coretta Scott King. They questioned his daughter. They questioned his son. They questioned the Reverend Wyatt T. Walker. They questioned former city councilman Hosea Williams, who was one of his right-hand men. They questioned Andy Young, former mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, and former ambassador to the United Nations. They questioned them, and they questioned others, and they put the question to them about success or failure. They put the question to them, have we really made progress 30 years after Dr. King? They wanted them to analyze the dream of Dr. King, and they all said that they could see some change here and there, but they all said, they all agreed that America had a long, long way to go. Some of them were even specific. 30 years after Dr. King, if we're going to deal with civil rights and human rights, and we're going to weigh it properly, we must understand that affirmative action, which was important to Dr. King, but never has been important to me because the action has never been affirmative. We don't need affirmative action. We need reparations and freedom and independence, liberation and salvation. But affirmative action was important to Dr. King. 30 years after Dr. King, affirmative action does not even remain a dream anymore. It's a nightmare now. A recalcitrant cold wind blowing through Congress, blowing through the Senate, blowing through the White House, whistling throughout the hells of North America, has now swept affirmative action almost but from the scene today. 30 years after the dream of the dreamer, Section 8 entitlements, quota systems that were supposed to level the playing field after people had been robbed of their names, their language, their religion, their culture, their God, their folkways, their mores, their norms, robbed of the very power of our own being. All of that is being erased today. Such measures that were supposed to be set up to level the playing field. Now you've got devils, you've got so-called Jews, imposter Jews coming up with theories and theorems on a bell curve. Other crackers saying that we are genetically inferior. Other crackers saying that we are stuck at the bottom. Other crackers saying that we are black jelly beans stuck at the bottom of the bag or the jar. Look at it. You break both of my legs, and then you call a race. Break both of my legs, and you stand, somebody working with you, stands at the starter's line, fires the starter's pistol, and you're the only one running. You break the tape, and then you turn around and criticize me because I haven't made it to the finish line yet. I'm dragging along because you've broken both of my damn legs. How could you expect me to finish? The white man breaks our legs and then has a race and then says, well, you really are intellectually inferior to me. You robbed me of my name, my language, my religion, my culture, my God, my folkways, my mores, my norms, and then you turn around and give me a goddamn test? How could you expect me to score like you? 30 years after Dr. King, a Negro sits on the Supreme Court bench named Clarence Thomas, standing always against his people and always for the enemy who put him there, married to a big dinosaur-looking white woman. Look like he going home to Jurassic Park every time he go home. Nigga have to get on a step ladder just to get some sugar from that big, tall white woman. And I don't know why we do that. Don't know why we do that. Go and get the biggest, ugliest white woman we can find. Clarence Thomas have to hug her on one side and the beast is so big and then run around and hug her on the other side. 30 years after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there's a rise in the Ku Klux Klan. 30 years after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the dream of the dreamer and his civil rights. 30 years after Minister Malcolm X, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Brother Omar Wale, and his dream of human rights. 30 years thereafter, the white man still considers us 3/5 of a human being. At the Million Man March, we had well over 1 million to 1.5 million, maybe even 2 million, convened by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The first foolishness was talking about separating the messenger from the message, which came out by Messy Jesse. He popularized this madness about separating the messenger from the message. Close to 1.5 million, 2 million. And the crackers say he saw 400,000. Why? It's because the cracker was still counting us as 3/5 of a human being. He got mixed up on them fractions. Got them fractions mixed up. 30 years after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 30 years after Martin Luther King Jr., a rise in the Ku Klux Klan, a rise in the Aryan Brotherhood, a rise in the American Nazi Party, a rise in the skinheads, a rise in militia groups,